Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Sasha Seymore, co-founder of Ethos, an adaptive readiness platform that's raised over $34 million in funding. Sasha, how are you?
I'm good. It's great to see you today, Brett. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, super excited to have you. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Talk to us about everything that you're building there at Ethos.
Yeah, so we're an adaptive readiness platform, and at a high level, what our tool does is we take passive learning material and convert them into really interactive, really engaging, sort of interactive lessons that are designed with lots of best practices and training and education in mind. And then we give you analytics and data on what your team is getting right and getting wrong. And so at a high level, the way the platform works is we've got an AI tool that will basically take your passive material, it'll read all of it, build it into almost Rosetta Stone or Duolingo type of trainings and learnings. And then once you deliver that to your end users who can take the trainings on any sort of type or material of training, we give you analytics and data on what they're getting right, what they're getting wrong, et cetera. So that's ultimately what the platform does. In terms of our user base, we actually started with elite and professional athletic teams and programs, moved from there into the Department of Defense, where we've got about 40 different customers across Air Force, Space Force, Navy, and Marine Corps, and also have a substantial commercial arm as well, too. So it's a quick background.
How did you make that jump from athletics to the Department of Defense? That sounds like a big leap.
Yeah, so earliest kind of origin stories for the platform itself. So I was a basketball player at the University of North Carolina, walked onto the team. And when I made the team, I got handed this kind of giant three-ring notebook and told like, hey, go study and memorize this thing. This is going to be your playbook. And so I took it back to my dorm room at the time and I showed it to my roommate, Andrew, who was the student body president at Chapel Hill. And Andrew's big push when he was student body president was sort of changing the way that traditional classroom teaching was done. So away from kind of the normal model of what you would expect, which is I, professor, get up, I talk for an hour and a half, you kind of frantically take down notes on it, to much more of a blended learning or an active learning model where you might get a little information and then you get the quiz question on it, you get a little information and then you work together in a group. And the data behind this was really remarkable. It's a much more effective, it's a much better way for folks to actually go learn. And Andrew and I said, well, what if we took that type of style of learning, built it into a software platform, and applied it to sort of my particular use case of learning a playbook in the athletics world. So that's where we ultimately started. Andrew and I were both graduate students at Stanford and launched our platform there. Grew it to about 50 different athletic programs, everything from North Carolina basketball to Michigan football. Actually won a national championship last year, and they were using our tool 3 or 4 hours before they kicked off. We do all the training for the PGA Tour. Earlier this week, we signed the Seattle Seahawks. So super fun, like really, really exciting company. But as we were going, we realized that there were lots of different places where you could apply sort of this type of learning methodology and you could apply this type of tool training. And right around the same time that we started the company, I got a direct commission to do intelligence work for the Navy. And so I was going through sort of the intelligence reserve training pipeline, and I kept just seeing different areas where a platform like ours could really be applied within the Department of Defense. And so Andrew and I, while still in grad school at Stanford, said, hey, we think that there might be a big opportunity with the Department of Defense. Here's a course at Stanford called Hacking for Defense, where ultimately the DoD takes problems, give them to Stanford students to go solve. And that's the course. So Andrew and I decided, let's go take this course. In it, we got paired with a group from the Air Force that was looking to revolutionize the way that they did pilot training. Got to interview 100 different folks across the Air Force on their biggest challenges in pilot training, and then basically reshifted the platform to fit what they were looking for to improve pilot training. Went basically a month after the class ended, signed our first contract with the Air Force, and then grew from there.
That's surprising to me that Stanford would have that type of course. Yeah, my general view on Silicon Valley, at least from going back 5-10 years, was that it wasn't cool, it wasn't acceptable to be part of the defense ecosystem. I think a lot of Silicon Valley, a lot of tech startups, a lot of their employees wanted to stay as far away as possible from defense. Am I wrong in that thinking, or what was the sentiment at that time towards defense?
No, that's wrong. Not wrong at all. I think it's interesting if over the past maybe 5 or 6 months, you've seen a real boom in interest in the defense tech world. And Andrew and I have kind of looked at each other and been like, holy cow, we're suddenly cool. Like back when we were raising our sort of pre-seed rounds and our seed rounds, everybody was looking at both the like training kind of learning tech world as well as the defense tech world and going like, well, these are just not cool sectors. These are not hot sectors. Like, why are you building in this space? And we're like, well, we think there's a real opportunity and we're passionate about it. And now fast forward 5 years and everybody thinks we're the greatest thing because we're AI and we're defense tech. So we're suddenly hot. But you're correct. I think the ongoing narrative in the venture capital world was, and just like Silicon Valley in general, was that defense just moved too slowly to be able to actually support venture-backed tech companies. And then B, that there weren't the people that cared within Silicon Valley, that there weren't patriots who actually wanted to build for the DoD who actually lived here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are kind of a couple different things. One, early on, there were certainly folks that disagreed with that. The Hacking for Defense course in particular is founded and started by this guy named Steve Blank, who inventor of kind of the lean launchpad methodology, was an Air Force veteran himself, and recognized this huge disconnect between the technologies that we were building in Silicon Valley and the technologies that were available for sailors, soldiers, airmen in the Department of Defense, and wanted to figure out a way that you could kind of bridge the two of them. Mm-hmm. I also think he recognized that there are some people who might not want to build for the Department of Defense, but there's lots of other people who recognize that if we want to continue, this is me going on a soapbox a little bit, but if we want to continue for America to be this kind of global beacon of democracy and human rights, and for sort of our global way of life to continue, like, we have to be able to adapt the latest and greatest minds in the world to help with American security and help with American defense. And so we kind of recognized that. And I think the big shift was basically getting the Department of Defense to move at the speed that Silicon Valley does. And that's the thing, that there were always sort of like underlying folks pushing in that direction. The Defense Innovation Unit, which I'm a reservist for, has always been there trying to sort of push in that direction. Certainly some of these more innovation arms like AFWorks and NavalX and those types of sort of branches and groups within the DoD. But I think what we're starting to see right now is a broader shift and a broader recognition of stuff that I think you've had sort of people who have been advocating for it for quite some time, certainly 5, 6, 7, even 10 years ago. But now it's become a little bit more mainstream to see that shift.
It's funny too, because like I watched this documentary probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it was a couple of years old at that point. I believe it's called The Secret History of Silicon Valley. And like the history of Silicon Valley is defense. Like it very much started out, serving defense. I think it was Sunnyvale at one point. Like that entire town was working for Lockheed Martin, I believe. Like our roots are here. So it's good to see that that's changed now. I follow a lot of what Palmer Luckey rants about, and I think how he was describing it was we were kind of living in this like post-war world where like we thought that warfare was like done, that there were going to be no more wars, and then now with Ukraine, everything happening in Israel is like a bit more real, that like war could happen, and it seems to be that that's getting more people to be a bit more patriotic than they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 3 things that I will recommend as sort of reading for your listeners if they're interested in this topic. One is basically rebooting the article Arsenal of Democracy from Andrew. It basically talks through like the history of Silicon Valley, the history of some of the sort of broader defense tech contractors, kind of where we are right now from a defense tech world, and then what we need to do in the future. Palantir has one called the 18 Theses. I don't remember the exact title itself, but a similar type of just overarching, here's what's wrong with kind of the way that our Department of Defense is currently contracting technology and what needs to shift. And there's a book, this one is actually not on our current sort of crisis in, I think, the acquisition of defense technology, but more so kind of a hopeful view, but it's called Freedom Forge. And it's basically about the history of World War II, and specifically the Americans from industry who basically pulled into sort of building and creating wartime manufacturing technology for the Department of Defense. And if you read it, it's this just like incredibly inspiring book about how America mobilized itself to basically end sort of the Nazi regime, stop Japan, and did it basically on the back of this wild manufacturing giant that was created through mobilizing our private sector. And I think in some ways you read it and you go, okay, well, if something similar like that is to happen, there's a lot of work that we need to do right now in order for that to happen. In some ways, we can't do it because ultimately China's manufacturing sector is much, much larger than ours, and that's not going to change. But the places where we do and can still win is in our technology that's in Silicon Valley and some of the work and advantages we have there. And we have to figure out a way to get that to work better, faster with the Department of Defense.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
Nice. I like the reading Rex. As I'm sure we're talking about, like, everyone's into defense tech. Yeah, I've been deep into it now for probably a year. Like I read Kill Chain, that was good. That's the chief strategy officer at Andrew, I believe. Unit X, I just started reading that one. So especially that last one, I think that's fascinating. The history of kind of World War II manufacturing and everything that happened there. I'll dive into that one.
Yeah, Unit X is really good too.
Did you like Unit X?
Yeah.
Nice. I mean, it's hard to read those books and not feel like we're a little bit screwed, for lack of a better description. Like reading Kill Chain, that was my takeaway. It's like, we don't dramatically change things, then we're going to end up in a bad spot. What's your general view on like where the world is?
Yeah. So I mentioned at the start of this that part of the reason why we started working with the Department of Defense in the first place was because I'd gotten a direct commission to do intel work for the Navy. And part of that was because my grandfather on my dad's side was Marine. So I had service and history in my family. And the other part of it was my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a Ukrainian freedom fighter that actually gotten shot through the knee riding his horse into battle for Ukrainian freedom. And then my grandfather was born in Poland, but Ukrainian was his first language. And that's ultimately where my first name comes from. And so it was something that I kind of always wanted to be a part of, always wanted to figure out how to support, always wanted to be involved in. It was something that was bigger and broader than myself and something that sort of gave me the sense and the feeling that I was kind of following in my grandfather's footsteps in some ways. I'm also from a sort of relatively small town in eastern North Carolina where we have a Marine Corps base probably about 15 minutes away. So I had lots of friends whose dads were also involved in it as well too. And I remember when I got my direct commission to go serve in the Navy and be an intelligence officer, I had this almost like idea in my head of what the US military was, of like the greatest military fighting force the world had ever seen, the global hegemon that was kind of sort of keeping peace, the Pax Americana, that sort of thing. And I remember when I went to my first intelligence schoolhouse with the Navy, I went in and they sort of popped up this kind of like old, it's almost like PowerPoint looking kind of system. And there was kind of this old PowerPoint thing in there. It was like this kind of CBT type thing. And it was like, the instructor got up and he started talking, and there was a picture there of like, I don't know, it was a picture of Osama bin Laden. And it was like the greatest threat, like the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States right now is Osama bin Laden and global terrorism. And this was, I think, the year 2021, 2020. And the instructor was like, hey, this is not true at all. This is like 10 years out of date. Like the greatest threat is like China and Russia and the rise of great power competition. And like, that is really what we need to focus on. But I can't change the thing because the technology is out of date and I can't like change the slide. So just ignore it. And I was thinking at the time as sort of a tech founder who had built a technology for sports teams that was better than what they currently had. And it was this like almost like shocking realization for me that, holy cow, we have maybe some of the greatest warships the world has ever seen, but yet we don't have software technology that can keep up with it, we're sort of in the 1980s here. And I think almost everyone that I have talked to that cares really passionately about defense tech into the Department of Defense has had a similar moment. I think if you're reading Unit X, Raj Shah, who is actually an investor in Learn to Win, but you see Raj talking about how he was flying his fighter jet and was using like his commercially developed iPhone to go like navigate through some particular part while he was flying. And it's just like, this is wild. So that was a long sort of tangent about sort of personal motivations and sort of a sense that we are certainly behind from a technology into the Department of Defense perspective. I think from like my overall, like what's my overall feeling? It's like on the one hand, like a little nervous. On the one hand, a little like we need to wake up and move. On the one hand, a little bit like frustrated that there are still things in the Department of Defense that are so bureaucratic and so slow. On the other hand, I also am around a lot of the people who are working on this problem day in and day out. I took the Hacking for Defense course at Stanford. I'm a reservist for DIU. I have at this point spent a lot of my last 4 or 5 years in this kind of defense innovation ecosystem. And I also see that there's a lot of really cool stuff that we're building really quickly. I think we need to put more juice behind it. Like there's a lot of stuff that we need to go do, but I'm kind of optimistic that we can get there, both from I'm seeing all the work that's going on for people behind the scenes and what they're building. I'm also just optimistic in America writ large. And maybe this is an overly optimistic feeling, but like you look at sort of the great challenges that have come throughout history, and like America has risen up to all of them. And I just have a strong sort of personal belief that a country filled with free individuals who believe in democracy and who believe in the ideals of what they are going to do are just going to figure it out in a way that a country that doesn't believe in that isn't going to be able to. So again, maybe like, my stump speech, but that's how I'm feeling.
We're aligned completely on that. And, just a general belief that like entrepreneurship kind of solves everything. So I'm happy to see that we're moving into this place where like it's okay to be an entrepreneur. It's okay to be a founder building a defense. I think that's good for society. I think that was a bit scary like 10 years ago, however long ago, when like it was not cool, it was not acceptable, it was like not okay to be in defense. So I think now that we've kind of changed that stigma a little bit, I'm a bit more optimistic than I was 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah, you mentioned you follow some of Palmer Luckey's stuff. I actually listened to him speak at Stanford a couple of weeks ago, and he had a phrase that I'm going to steal, but basically he was like, 5 years ago, I would talk to folks who wanted to go build in the Department of Defense or build defense tech. And I would tell them like, don't do it. Like I'm doing it, Palmer Luckey, because I've already had a successful outcome. I'm a billionaire. I can maneuver and mobilize resources that just normal people cannot. If you can't do that, if you're not Elon Musk, if you're not Palmer Luckey, like don't build in the defense ecosystem. And he's like, fast forward today, people ask me the same question. And he's like, there's a bunch of money now coming towards defense tech companies, and they're funding really good startups and they're funding really bad startups. And you could be one of those really bad startups too. Like, and that was his thing. And I think there's lots of folks out there who will build good companies and bad companies that are approaching the defense tech world. But I'm generally optimistic as well. Like, I love the shift. I think it's good for America writ large. I think it's good for the globe writ large. I think it's good for the American taxpayer writ large. And yeah, I thought I'd steal Palmer's quote there.
That's a good quote. It sounds like for you too, it must be a pretty interesting position, right? Because you proved the technology works in athletics, but then you really proved it worked in the defense. So I'm guessing that it's a lot easier to go out and convince an enterprise that you have technology that's viable, that works, because it's already been battle tested, so to speak. Is that a fair way to summarize the general push into the private sector?
Yeah, totally. I mean, at this point, we've got probably 30 or 40 customers in the commercial ecosystem as well, mostly large life sciences and biopharmaceutical companies, as well as sort of larger manufacturing companies. And so I think for us, you're entirely correct. There's certainly like a brand halo that comes when your first customers are national champions and Super Bowl winning teams. And that helps you, once you've proven yourself in there, get into the Department of Defense. And then when you go from the Department of Defense into the commercial ecosystem, the commercial world, it's much easier to say like, hey, Super Bowl winning teams use our software. Our training is certified to do security certified to handle information up to impact level 6. So we can put secret level training on it. So like, we're not a rinky dink startup that doesn't have sort of, I think battle tested was the word you used. Like we're battle tested. We've got cybersecurity accreditations. We have folks who are using it. We think it can work in this scenario too. Now, I think that like, again, having sold now at this point into industries that are as diverse as like athletic teams to the Department of Defense to large life sciences and manufacturing, like as much as it's cool and interesting for your Novartis to hear about how cool and interesting it is the work that you do with an NFL team or with the US Navy, ultimately the case study that resonates the most is like, what are you doing with AbbVie? What are you doing with Regeneron? What are you doing with a direct competitor of mine? And do you understand my industry? So like, that's much, much easier, but you're correct. Like some of the brand does transition.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I have to imagine it helps at least get the first meetings, right? Like it can get you in the door, but they want to see case studies from the industry or examples from the industry. That makes perfect sense. What's the revenue split today in terms of commercial to government?
Yeah, we're about 70% DoD, 30% commercial.
In 10 years from now, what do you think that split will be? It will be similar, 50-50? What do you anticipate?
It's a good question. I'd say probably around 50-50. I think for us, we see a tremendous market opportunity with the Department of Defense. I think we were building there certainly before it was cool for anybody else to. And we went through the hard work of getting cybersecurity accreditations, as well as the contracting vehicles, as well as the industry knowledge and know-how. And there's some really cutting edge stuff that we're doing with AI within the Department of Defense that I think is going to give us a huge advantage over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. But ultimately, Palantir, obviously a phenomenally large company, phenomenally successful. If you look at their branding, they've got DoD written all over the things they do. They're a majority commercial customer, company. More of their revenue comes from the commercial sector than it does the Department of Defense. And so I think that just from an overall market perspective, the commercial sector is so large that eventually it will rival, if not be larger than our Department of Defense business. But right now we're building for DoD just because we see the huge opportunity. And I think there are some unique things with our platform that actually fit really well with the Department of Defense today that I think make it a good fit for us to pursue right now.
What about your marketing strategy? Let's zoom out a little bit. What does the marketing strategy look like?
Yeah. So marketing strategy across the DoD, across the commercial side, across athletics. What does it look like holistically?
Yeah. What's the holistic marketing strategy? Or maybe we can say marketing philosophy, maybe a better word to use there.
Ultimately, that's probably where I go into we're rebranding the company and blah, blah, blah. But honestly, if you want my honest take in the Department of Defense, we don't yet know how to market to the DoD. And what we have discovered is that the best way to work with the Department of Defense is through doing a really good job, through building champions, and through top-down introductions that come from former 2- and 3-star generals who have worked in that particular place, understand the ecosystem, and can make introductions for you into their groups. You're not going to get a 3-star to sign on to something because you hit them with a LinkedIn ad. That just doesn't work. And you can't send them a golf club and be like, hey, this is a brand, we want to do a branded golf club, because that's also illegal.
And now that there's a new wave of founders that are moving into the defense sector, what advice would you have for them based on everything that you've learned so far in selling to the Department of Defense?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, the first thing they need to know is that DoD is complicated. It's not the same type of sale that you would make to a commercial customer. And there's lots of things that can be quite confusing when you start working in the Department of Defense that you are not going to run into on the commercial side. And so to give a good example, when we work with commercial customers, they will start small and give us maybe an initial pilot, maybe 30K, maybe 50K. We'll run that pilot. We'll prove that the software works. And if we do a really good job, there's a follow-on afterwards. Maybe it's a 300K ARR follow-on for us to expand our technology to a particular group. And if we do well, it'll expand again. The Department of Defense sometimes works like that, and sometimes it doesn't. Our first contract with the DoD was a 750K SBAR direct to phase 2 via AFWorks. And I think as early stage founders, we're holy cow, a 750K initial contract with the Department of Defense. Wow, there must be a huge market opportunity for what we're doing. And if we really deliver on this, then there'll be clear follow-on funding right afterwards, or really clear follow-on funding. And that's just not true at all. The money that's connected to SBR funding is totally unrelated to sort of long-term recurring revenue. And winning an SBAR is only a tiny proof point that people have any interest in what you're actually going to build. And so certainly, yes, win that SBAR vehicle and use it to be able to get the contracting vehicle so you can do SBR phase 3s with follow-on companies. But don't have any sort of illusions that suddenly means that you have cracked the code or figured out the way to go work with the DoD. So that's one of those avenues. I think another one is the DoD really, really needs innovative entrepreneurial people from the private sector to come bring solutions to the Department of Defense. But you have to have a balance of innovative folks from the private sector with people from the public sector who know what's going on. And so to give an example, for us, would do an amazing job of sort of finding an initial customer, delivering for that customer, and then getting totally lost in the bureaucracy of how you actually expand that contract. For instance, we had one customer that we started working with. It was a schoolhouse, and they handed us their training material. We took it, we put it into our AI platform. It converted all of their training over. We started delivering it to students. Within 6 months, we had cut their failure rate at the schoolhouse in half and saved them over $2 million. Direct, they calculated $2 million in savings. And you're phenomenal, clear $2 million. Of course, they're going to expand it from there. but we just didn't understand what the ecosystem looked like to be able to actually grow and expand that contract. So we just stayed with that same group because we didn't know where the funding was to actually grow that revenue. And so probably one of the most successful things that we did was we found basically retired generals from those particular areas who said, hey, I understand this ecosystem. I really believe in what you're doing. I see the impact of what you're delivering for these end sailors and airmen. This is a strategic importance to the Department of Defense. And I can basically talk you through, here's the ecosystem, here's who works in it, here's the folks you need to talk to, and here's the little quirks that you're not going to understand, that this is how you actually navigate it. And those kind of Sherpas were invaluable for us as we continued to grow. I also think there's definitely some stuff you shouldn't do. Like, I think some folks come in with the thought of like, oh, this is like the commercial space, so I will market to it in the same way that I might market to the commercial ecosystem. But like, you can't LinkedIn ad a 3-star general. Like, that's not going to work. You can't like send him a golf club. That's illegal. These folks are not like going to answer your cold inbound email. Like, there are certain places where they get information from, whether it's conferences, whether it's trusted advisors, whether it's from sort of folks in their command who you need to deliver really well with, which is where they get their information. And you need to approach it from that perspective, not from like a commercial lens into the DoD.
Final question for you. I'm seeing now that we're way over on time. Let's zoom out 3 to 5 years into the future. What's the big picture vision look like for everything that you're building there at Ethos?
Yeah. So we want to build the adaptive readiness platform of the future. And we're starting with the Department of Defense. And our big picture vision is to basically be able to say, okay, across an entire soldier, sailor, airman's journey, we are going to be able to map out from a knowledge and competence perspective all the things that they need to know to be able to perform a job particularly well. We're going to be able to map out, here's the things that they do know, and here's how we map the two of them and get them to a place where they are able to perform every single one of those jobs excellently well. So like, to give an example, because that was kind of a high ethereal view of what I was talking about, when we were first starting to build our platform, one of the members of our team had actually worked on the Fitzgerald-McCain collision. So basically, for those not familiar, it was this collision in the Navy, cost the Department of Defense hundreds of millions of dollars, lost the lives of folks. And ultimately, when they did a review of it, they basically found that the folks who were basically manned to go to work on this ship, there had been a change in the throttle and they hadn't been trained properly on how this throttle works. With Ethos, our vision is that you would have basically a knowledge map of what are all the skills and capabilities needed to be able to be the person who's going to be able to run this particular ship. And then at Ethos, we would also have mapped, here are the things that this particular person is trained on. It would automatically be able to recognize that, build and create the training that's needed, immediately send it to that person, and they would be automatically upskilled. And here's the thing they need to know to be able to perform that job effectively. And that's everything across, like, when I think about sort of the different use cases for AI across our platform, is both in terms of AI authoring, where you'd be able to say, hey, let me create this lesson immediately based on training and instruction material that I already have. Here's the things that we need. Boom, it goes off and created it, as well as the knowledge and competency mappings that we have on the back end of what are all the things that they need to know.
Amazing. That's a great place for us to end here. Now, before we wrap, for any listening in, where should we send them? Where should they go?
Yeah, so you'd want to go find my name, Sasha Seymore, on LinkedIn. Would love to chat with anybody.
Amazing. Thanks so much for taking time, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, Brett.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.